Welcome to today's deep dive. I am really excited to have you joining us for this one.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating conversation today.
It really is. So our mission today is exploring this fascinating alternative way that groups of people actually make decisions and, govern themselves. A system called sociocracy.
Right, or sometimes you'll hear it called dynamic governance.
Exactly. And the whole idea is that it's designed to be this ultimate middle path, right? Balancing true equality with actual boots on the ground efficiency. And to really dig into this, we've got a massive stack of sources today.
We really do. It's a great mix.
Yeah, we're looking at articles from the Foundation for Intentional Community. We've got these deep dive case studies from physical eco-villages and working farms, plus some incredibly sharp critiques from former co-housing residents, and even comparisons between different organizational structures used out in the corporate world.
Which is super helpful because it shows how this works across totally different environments.
Right. So before we get into the weeds, I want you to just picture a scenario. You're sitting in a conference room, the fluorescent lights are buzzing, the clock is ticking, and you've been agonizing for like 2 hours over a decision that honestly should have taken 10 minutes.
Oh, we have all been there. It is the worst.
Right. You're trapped in this paralyzing gridlock of consensus where literally just one person crossing their arms can hold the entire group hostage.
Yeah.
But then think about the alternative. You work under a boss whose top-down rules make absolutely zero sense on the ground. They walk in, drop a mandate from on high, and walk out.
Leaving you to deal with the fallout.
Exactly. You're stuck dealing with a policy that looks great on a spreadsheet but fails completely in reality. And we tend to just accept that these are our only two options, right? Complete gridlock or absolute tyranny.
Which is honestly a remarkably limiting way to view human cooperation. I mean, we just assume power can only flow in two directions. Like, either everyone holds it simultaneously and nothing gets done, or one person holds it exclusively and everyone else just suffers the consequences. But sociocracy is this radical departure from both of those paradigms.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I'm looking at this and thinking, where did this concept even come from? It sounds like some, modern Silicon Valley management fad.
It totally does sound like that.
Right. But looking at the sources, it actually has these surprisingly deep roots.
Yeah, to really trace the origins of sociocracy, you have to look at this very unexpected blend of Quaker egalitarianism and cybernetics.
Cybernetics, like
The-
cyborgs?
Well, not exactly Terminators. It's the science of communication, feedback loops, and control in self-regulating systems. But the modern version we're talking about today really took shape in the 1970s.
Okay.
There was this Dutch engineer named Gerard Endenburg, and he inherited his family's electrical engineering firm. Now, he had grown up in a Quaker school that used consensus for decision-making.
Oh, interesting. So he liked the equality part.
He did. But as an adult running a business, he knew that a slow, everyone must agree model would just not survive the fast-paced reality of running a profitable company.
Yeah, you can't pause the assembly line for a 3-hour feeling circle.
Exactly. He wanted to avoid the authoritarianism of a traditional boss, but he still needed a system that could actually execute a business strategy. So he just started applying the principles of electrical engineering and cybernetics directly to human social structures.
That is wild. But to really grasp why Endenburg's system is so revolutionary, we first need to look at the spectacular ways our default systems just, fail.
Oh, yeah. Especially in groups trying to do good in the world.
Right. The sources highlight this fascinating case study that illustrates this perfectly. It's about the Lost Valley Center. It's this 87-acre permaculture and education center out in Oregon.
Beautiful place, but they had some real struggles.
They really did. So originally, when they formed, they operated strictly on traditional consensus, meaning every single person in the community had to explicitly agree before anything could happen.
And the fallout from that unanimity trap is just severe. The sources note that traditional consensus led to what they actually called unanimity paralysis at Lost Valley.
Unanimity paralysis, wow.
Yeah. The process of discussing the work basically replaced the work itself. They were prioritizing absolute group harmony and these endless meetings where everyone processed their feelings over the actual physical needs of the land.
It's like, okay, think about trying to pick a movie with 10 friends.
Oh, a nightmare.
Right. You give every single person absolute veto power. Eventually, you just stare at a blank Netflix screen for 2 hours and then go to sleep.
That is exactly what happens.
And on an 87-acre farm, that means nothing gets built. The sources show that at Lost Valley, the competent people who actually had initiative were getting so frustrated by the endless talking that they just started leaving.
Yeah, the physical buildings had all this mounting deferred maintenance.
The community almost went bankrupt.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you simply cannot hug a broken water pipe into fixing itself.
No, you really can't.
So you're stuck. Consensus is too slow, and hierarchy is too mean. But before they found Sociocracy, Lost Valley actually swung to the total opposite extreme to try and save the farm.
They did. They swung hard. They formed a traditional, top-down, hierarchical business board. They hired an executive director, installed managers, and shifted entirely to a strict accountability profit generation model.
Which, I mean, the buildings actually got fixed, right?
They did. They survived bankruptcy. The physical problems were solved.
But they totally lost their soul in the process.
Completely. The cultural shift was devastating. The sources describe this new culture of deep resentment. Volunteers and staff were terrified of speaking truth to power because they were afraid of being fired or kicked out of the community.
Man, that's rough.
Gossip ran rampant, morale plummeted. The very people who came there to live a different kind of life just found themselves in a standard corporate grind. They were trapped between these two failing value systems. Basically, green values, which are all about process over product, hugs, endless meetings, and orange values, which are all hierarchy and profit over heart.
So how did they get out of it?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Lost Valley finally broke that cycle. They adopted a yellow value system, Sociocracy. They formed what they called a positive action team, combining the joy and inclusion of their early days with the sheer effectiveness of a corporate board.
Which brings us to the absolute core mechanism of how Sociocracy splits that difference. Because it requires a massive psychological shift for anyone who has ever sat in a meeting.
It really does.
We have to move from the idea of consensus to the idea of consent.
Yes, that is the pivotal shift in the entire framework, because consensus asks this really heavy, almost impossible question. Do we all agree this is the best possible idea?
Which, spoiler alert, 10 people will never agree on what the best idea is.
Exactly. But consent asks a much lighter, far more practical question. It asks, is this good enough for now and safe enough to try?
Good enough for now and safe enough to try. I love that so much. It is such a relieving standard for any team trying to actually move a project forward.
It takes so much pressure off the room.
Right. Under Sociocracy, a proposal moves forward unless someone in the circle has a paramount and reasoned objection. And this was a massive aha moment for you, the listeners. We were reading through these sources. In this system, an objection isn't seen as a roadblock.
No, not at all.
It's not someone just being difficult. It is actively treated as a vital gift of information.
It's treated as data. If someone objects, they're fundamentally saying, hey, I see a risk to our shared goal that the rest of you have missed.
But, and let me play devil's advocate here, because I know the immediate fear people have when they hear this. If I'm sitting in that circle, and I just generally don't like the proposal, like maybe just rubs me the wrong way, or I think my own idea is slightly cooler, can I just say I object and freeze the entire room? Like, how does this not just devolve right back into consensus?
It doesn't, because of the word reasoned. A paramount and reasoned objection. You cannot object just based on personal preference. Your objection must be directly tied to the group's established aim. You have to clearly explain how this specific proposal will actively harm the group's ability to achieve its goals.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. So if the proposal is to buy a new red tractor and you say, I object, I prefer green tractors, that is a preference, not a reasoned objection.
Right.
The facilitator will note your preference, but the proposal still passes because a red tractor doesn't harm the farm's aim of harvesting crops.
Okay, but what if the objection is valid? Let's say I raise my hand and say, I object to buying this specific red tractor because I looked at the maintenance manual and the parts have to be imported from overseas, which is going to totally bankrupt our annual equipment budget.
No, that is reasoned.
Right, it's tied to the aim. So what happens to the proposal then? Does the red tractor idea just die?
It doesn't die. And this is where Sociocracy really shines, through a process called integration.
Integration.
Yeah. The objection isn't a veto that kills the idea. It's viewed as a structural flaw that needs fixing. The person proposing the idea and the person objecting work together right there in the meeting to amend the proposal.
Oh, wow. So they fix it live.
Exactly. Maybe they amend it to lease the tractor for a year instead, or they find a domestic supplier for the parts. The objection literally becomes the raw material for a stronger, safer policy.
That completely changes the energy of a meeting. You go from this combative debate where you're just trying to convince everyone to love your idea to this collaborative process of just proving that the idea won't break anything.
Yes.
And the efficiency of this is wild. The sources highlight this stunning statistic.
Yeah.
85% of sociocratic proposals pass in the very first round.
Because the threshold is no longer perfection, the threshold is simply safety and functionality.
Right. But knowing that perfection isn't the goal doesn't really explain how you actually get 50 people to run an organization without chaos. If no one has veto power and everyone is consenting, who actually holds the credit card?
That's the big question.
Yeah. What is the actual architecture of this system when it scales up?
Well, the structural backbone relies on two highly specific concepts: nested circles and double linking.
Nested circles.
Right. Instead of having a general assembly where everyone decides on everything, which, again, is the root of unanimity paralysis authority, is decentralized into semi-autonomous circles.
Okay, so breaking it down.
Yeah. You might have a finance circle, a land use circle, a membership circle. And here is the key. Each circle has absolute final authority over its specific domain.
So the people who actually know about soil health and farming are the ones making the farming decisions.
Exactly.
Without needing approval from, like, the accounting department.
They are completely sovereign within their domain. But to prevent these circles from just becoming isolated silos that never talk to each other, you need a highly intentional communication structure.
Right. Otherwise, the farm buys a tractor and finance doesn't even know.
Exactly. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where double linking comes in. Every single circle is connected to the broader, overarching, coordinating circle by two people, not just one.
Oh, a two-way street of communication.
Yes. You have a leader who represents the top-down flow of information. Their job is to ensure the circle's work aligns with the broader organizational aims. But you also have a delegate who is selected by the circle itself from the bottom up.
Okay.
And their sole job is to make sure the circle's needs and their realities and their pushbacks are heard by the upper management layer. It creates a structural guarantee that information flows in both directions simultaneously.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because we actually have a fantastic real-world example of this architecture in action from the sources.
The tractor story.
Yes, Collective Space is farmed down in Virginia. They're an intentional community, and they needed a new tractor. Now, a tractor is a massive capital expense. Let's play this out in our three paradigms.
Okay, let's do it.
Under an autocracy, one boss just buys the tractor. Maybe it's the wrong one for the terrain. Maybe it puts the farm in too much debt, but whatever. The boss signed the check.
Right.
Under consensus, you have 20 people arguing for 6 weeks over the budget, the environmental impact of diesel versus electric, until everyone is absolutely exhausted.
Nobody wins.
Nobody wins.
Yeah.
But under sociocracy, the land use circle, the people actually doing the physical land restoration, they drafted the proposal.
Because it falls squarely within their domain of expertise.
Right. But it obviously affects the finances of the entire farm. So they didn't just force it through. Through that double linking communication you mentioned, they negotiated a brilliant integrated proposal.
It is so smart.
It really was. They crafted a policy where members who could afford it paid slightly higher monthly dues to cover the debt of the tractor. And in exchange, the members who were out there physically working the land had their physical labor requirements lowered because the tractor made them more efficient.
The beauty of that resolution is that no single person had the power to force this purchase through, and no single person had the power to unilaterally block it.
Yeah.
They took legitimate concerns about debt, integrated them, modified the proposal, and arrived at a place where everyone could consent. It perfectly aligns decision-making authority with the people who actually have to live with the consequences of the decision.
And there's this highly specific detail from that farm that I just found fascinating. They instituted a 90-day integration period for all new members.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah. If you join the community, you are totally welcome to sit in and observe the circle meetings for 3 months, but you have absolutely zero governance rights until month 3. They explicitly separate financial ownership from governance rights.
You have to earn the right to object, basically.
Right. You have to learn the culture of decision-making. You have to understand how to actually give a reasoned objection before you get a seat at the table.
It's a vital protective measure. It safeguards the integrity of the whole sociocratic system while still allowing new people the time they need to unlearn all their old habits of, consensus or hierarchy.
Now, all of this sounds incredible. It sounds like this beautifully engineered utopia of efficiency and harmony.
It does on paper.
Right. But we are talking about human beings here. Does this intricate, highly structured system actually hold up to the messy, emotional reality of human nature over the long term?
That is the ultimate stress test, and the sources do provide some sobering reality checks on this front.
Let's bring in Damien Dutay. He wrote a really sharp critique based on his time actually living in a co-housing community that tried to use sociocracy.
Yeah, his insights are incredibly valuable.
He basically argues that sociocracy was fundamentally built for businesses. Organizations like Gerard Endenburg's engineering firm, which have a very clear, objective, shared goal. Build a product, make a profit, serve the client. But in intentional communities or neighborhood groups, the goal is often this vague, fuzzy idea of like living together differently or building community.
And his critique hits on a fundamental vulnerability of the system. Sociocracy relies entirely on circles having a clearly defined aim. Remember, you can only object if a proposal harms the aim.
Right, the red tractor.
Exactly. If a group doesn't actually know what they are aiming for, how do you determine if an objection is valid? Without a crystal clear shared aim, the nested circles just spin their wheels. The discussions completely devolve into theoretical debates because everyone in the room has a slightly different internal definition of what building community actually means.
And Dutay wasn't the only one raising red flags in the literature. Sustainability researcher Jem Bendel points out another structural danger. He says sociocracy can inadvertently reproduce privilege within a group.
Which is a heavy critique for a system designed to be egalitarian.
Huge. Because at the end of the day, it takes a massive amount of time and mental energy to attend all these nested circle meetings, formulate reasoned objections, and participate in integration rounds.
That's a lot of talking.
It is. It reminds me of the danger of a soft technocracy. Think of it like sitting down to play an incredibly complex modern board game with a 40-page rule book.
Oh, I know those games.
Right. The person who had the time to memorize the rule book effectively holds all the power in the room. They know exactly when to invoke a specific rule to get their way.
Yeah.
So if you are highly educated, if you are comfortable with structured intellectual dialogue, and if you have plenty of free time, you are going to thrive in sociocracy.
You inadvertently become the sociocratic elite within the group, literally dictating the flow of the organization simply because you mastered the mechanics of the meetings.
Exactly. But what if you communicate more informally? What if you process information emotionally rather than analytically? Or, and this is a big one, what if you are a single parent who is just too busy raising kids and working a day job to attend a 3-hour feedback circle on a Wednesday night?
You're just left out.
Your voice is effectively marginalized, not by malice, not by a tyrannical boss, but by the sheer organizational weight of the system itself.
And this raises an important question for any group considering this model. How do you balance the deep need for structured, inclusive governance with the very real reality of daily burnout? Because if a governance system is too heavy to carry, people will just drop it and revert back to whoever shouts the loudest.
Do the sources offer a way out of that trap? Because honestly, it seems like a fatal flaw for grassroots organizations.
The solution lies in the fact that sociocracy has self-correction built directly into its DNA.
Okay, how so?
Well, it doesn't claim to be perfect. It claims to be adaptable. Every policy, every role has a set expiration and review date. They utilize these meeting evaluations at the end of every single gathering to explicitly ask, hey, did this format work? Was this meeting too long? Who didn't we hear from today?
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, the community is fully empowered to constantly tweak the rules so it doesn't become a bureaucratic nightmare. If the meetings are too long, the circle has the absolute authority to change how, when, and where they meet.
So the system actually iterates on itself based on the tension the group is feeling.
Exactly.
Now, to really crystallize the unique flavor of sociocracy, I think it helps to compare it to its famous, much stricter corporate cousin. I mean, anyone who follows management trends, I've probably heard of this one. Holacracy.
Yes, holacracy is highly visible in the corporate sphere. Companies like Zappos famously adopted it, which led to widespread media coverage.
And what's fascinating is that holacracy actually evolved directly from sociocracy.
It did.
They share a massive amount of DNA. They both use circles, they both rely on consent rather than consensus, and they both utilize roles instead of static job titles. But if you look at how they actually operate on the ground, they have vastly different vibes.
The cultural divergence between the two is really stark. Sociocracy is fundamentally open source. It's flexible, adaptable, and deeply rooted in those early Quaker ideals of egalitarianism and human connection.
Right.
Holacracy, on the other hand, is a trademarked commercial system. It operates on a very rigid, predefined constitution.
And that constitution isn't just a metaphor. When a company adopts holacracy, the CEO actually has to sign a legally binding document ceding their traditional autocratic power over to the rulebook.
It's a massive surrender of executive control.
It really is. But the way power flows within the circles is where things really diverge. In sociocracy, a circle selects its own leader by consent from within, right? The group empowers the individual from the bottom up. In holacracy, the equivalent role is called the lid link, and that person is appointed top-down by the broader overarching circle. The circle itself doesn't actually get a say in who leads them.
And that structural difference creates a completely different psychological environment. Furthermore, the meeting styles are entirely distinct. In holacracy, operational efficiency is the supreme goal.
Right.
The facilitator is explicitly instructed to ruthlessly cut out any off-topic emotional chatter. If what you are saying is not strictly about the operational tension at hand, you are immediately cut off and redirected.
Which perfectly explains why intentional communities and eco-villages usually reject holacracy outright. I mean, if you were literally living with these people, sharing a garden, sharing a kitchen, raising kids together, a system that ruthlessly cuts out your emotional reality feels incredibly cold.
It's far too businesslike for a community.
Exactly. Sociocracy, on the other hand, is very frequently paired with practices like nonviolent communication. It explicitly carves out space for emotional responsibility.
It does.
Before a proposal even gets to the formal consent phase, sociocracy uses these reaction rounds where you're actually supposed to share how a proposal makes you feel. You get to say, I'm anxious about this, or I'm really excited about this. And that emotion is validated before the group moves into the analytical phase of checking for reasoned objections.
Because it views the human emotional element not as an annoying obstacle to efficiency, but as a crucial, valid data point for the long-term health of the whole system.
So what does this all mean for you? We have explored a lot of ground today. We've seen how sociocracy offers a genuine third way. It sits right in that sweet spot between the exhausting paralysis of consensus, where everyone holds a veto, and the oppressive tyranny of hierarchy, where one person holds a megaphone.
It's a really powerful alternative.
It is. Whether you are running a corporate boardroom, organizing a neighborhood community garden, or honestly just trying to navigate a fraught family gathering, there are profound tools here that you can apply. The simple principle of safe enough to try, moving away from that agonizing need for perfect agreement, can radically reduce the friction in your life. Delegating real authority to the people actually doing the work, rather than trying to micromanage everything from above, it just changes the entire dynamic of how a group functions.
It requires unlearning a lot of our deeply ingrained habits about power and control. But the payoff is immense.
Yeah.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, drawing on the very origins of sociocracy that we discussed at the top of the deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
Remember that Gerard Endenburg based this entire system on cybernetics, the study of how natural biological systems function and self-regulate.
Right, the non-Terminator science.
Exactly. Think about your own body. Your lungs and your brain do not call a meeting and vote on every single breath you take.
That would be exhausting.
But neither does one completely dominate and ignore the needs of the other. They act as semi-autonomous circles, they operate sovereignly within their own domains, but they are deeply, inextricably connected by constant, complex feedback loops.
Wow, I love that analogy.
What if we stopped trying to engineer our organizations like rigid industrial machines built with bosses and gears and levers? What if instead we started designing our groups, our companies, and our communities like living, breathing biological organisms?
That is a fascinating way to look at it. Imagine sitting in your next agonizing meeting, and instead of feeling like a broken gear in a machine, you realize you're just part of a nervous system learning how to breathe.
Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep exploring these ideas, keep questioning the default ways we operate, and keep looking for better ways to build things together. We'll catch you next time.